Hey class, welcome to part 5 of Kingdom, Exile, and Return. This is part 5 of 6, so only one to go, and we're going to wrap up this whole section next week with the return, so I hope you guys can make it, and I'd love to see you on Sunday. Let's start with just kind of setting the stage for this week, for part 5. What I gave you for your reading was, as I'm sure you noticed, a snapshot, a slice, a survey of literature, prophetic literature specifically, from the time period of the exile. So a good question that we had in class that I think bears repeating here on the video so everyone can get the benefit of thinking about this and hearing this. The question basically was, how do we kind of understand the differences between the audience of some of this prophetic literature, who this is aimed at, who's doing the speaking? It's multiple different prophets across all of these different chapters that I gave you guys to read. And the answer is that is really an important question, because we do have to realize and understand at the outset that there are two different kingdoms, right? There is the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Both of them at different times are invaded and destroyed to some degree, in some measure, and then the people are exiled away from those kingdoms into different places. The northern kingdom by Assyria, which is further north, and the southern kingdom, Judah, by Babylon. And then, as we already saw in Daniel, Babylon was then conquered by Persia, and so the Persians at some point gained control over the southern kingdom of Judah. And that's going to be important as we move forward, not this week, but into next week's story for sure. So that's important to realize, that the prophets here are speaking to different groups of people, but the tone and the message, the general message, is similar enough that I think it's okay for us to not have to kind of go chapter by chapter and say, this one is specifically aimed at this group of people, this one at this group of people, at this time period, and during the reign of this specific king. Again, different kings were either better or worse than others during this time period. The sins of the people were a little bit greater, a little bit lesser at different time periods. But across all of those differences, I would like to suggest that there's enough similarity that it's okay for us not to get too hung up on who's writing exactly when, to whom, under which king's rule, things like that. Now, if we were teaching a seminary class and we had the whole semester just to focus on like prophetic literature of the exile or something like that, then we would probably get a little bit more detailed in that. But for our purposes, the reason I gave you just such a wide array of readings is because I mostly want to capture the tone and the general message of the prophets during this time. And I think and hope that the reading that you guys had to read for this week does that. So let's go ahead and jump in and let's talk about what we do think that tone is. I hope that you were able to capture from the beginning of the readings, and I'm talking Lamentations and the beginning of Zephaniah, the general tone of the people during the time of exile is loneliness, suffering, and despair. It's all bad news, and it's some of the worst news that Israel as a people group have experienced in general. They feel completely deserted, abandoned, left to their own destruction. And one verse that I highlighted in Lamentations 5:12, we're going to get a little later on to some messianic references to the way that God attempts to, spoiler alert, the way that God is going to attempt to speak hope into this desperate situation that the people find themselves in is going to include a glimmer, a picture, a snapshot of his plan to rescue them through the Messiah But even here in Lamentations 5, at this early stage of the reading that I gave you, verse 12, I find this really, really fascinating. Princes are hung up by their hands, it says. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to describe the general state of just horrible, outlandish, awful, terrible conditions that the people have found themselves in. And they say, it's so bad, even the princes are being hung up by their hands. But what a crazy messianic reference in a place that we wouldn't expect, I think, to find it. It's not in one of the Isaiah chapters or Jeremiah or Ezekiel, some of the ones that we're going to come to. But stuck in this crazy book of Lamentations, we find this incredible reference that obviously I think later is going to be fulfilled by Jesus himself, a prince hung up by his hands. So the people cry out to God from salvation, from all of this awful, terrible situation that they find themselves in. But the message that they get back is pretty clear and fairly consistent from each and every prophet during this time period. And the message seems to be, and there's multiple aspects to it, and let's try to talk about as many as we can. Number one, this is the consequence of the people's own actions. I highlighted the verse that says, Jerusalem sinned grievously, therefore she became filthy. This is from Lamentations. The idea here is, look, the situation that you find yourselves in is of your own creation. You have made yourselves desperate and have brought suffering on yourselves. You have separated yourself from God, and now you find yourselves lonely. And this is the natural consequence to everything that you have done. Another thing that comes back to the people from God through the prophets is that the ones the people have chosen over God are the very ones who are now tormenting them. The verse I picked out is, all her friends, and I think friends should be in quotes here, have dealt treacherously with her. The idea is that the people have, in essence, turned their back on God to chase after other things and to put other things in the place of God that they are worshiping, bowing down to, putting all of their hopes and dreams and time and effort into. And we asked the question in class to remember some of these things. Because if we're being honest, it's not just happening now. This has been happening really since the very beginning of our reading. And we started out in the Old Testament reading about the people doing this. But it has built, it has crescendoed up to this point where it seems to have gotten worse and worse and worse. And I asked the class to come up with some things that they feel like Israel has put in place of God. What are the things they have turned to as they've turned their back on God himself? Lots of really good answers. Kings, leaders, right? We talked about how they have put lots of hope in lots of these different symbols, specifically because we often think of idols being these things that we ourselves, put in place of God, such as, like, for me, maybe it's sports, maybe it's the Chiefs, right? I put way too much time and energy and emotion into following the Chiefs, and that has become an idol for me. Like, I'm saying that honestly right now. But we're specifically here talking about actual foreign gods, actual idols. They were literally building statues to foreign gods and bowing down and worshiping them and doing terrible things in the name of these foreign gods and for the sake of these foreign gods. So we have actual literal idolatry happening here during this time period for sure. And that was started, if you remember, by Solomon himself, the leader, the king, who has led the people astray in that way. Okay, let's get to a third point that I want to make here about the people crying out to God. There's a very, very key central question that is asked by the people that I think is summarized very, very well in Lamentations 5, verses 20 through 22. And I'm going to read that for us here. It says, "Why do you forget us forever? Why do you forsake us for so many days? Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old." And then comes the kicker in verse 22. "Unless you have utterly rejected us, and you remain exceedingly angry with us." The key question that the people are going to ask during this time period is going to be, has God abandoned us and forsaken us for good? Have we gone too far? Has he given us one too many chances? And now here we find ourselves unable to be reconciled back with God. Have we finally broken the camel's back with the last straw here? Have we strayed too far to be able to be rescued, even by God himself? And if we're being honest, I think that God lets this question simmer a little bit. He allows the people to sit with this question and doesn't answer it immediately. He lets there be tension. I was telling a story about how our kids, the other day, we were asking my middle child, Noelle, if she would go ahead and go on to her room because it was time to get ready for bed. We said, "Please, go to your room." And she said, "Go to my room and think about it." This is obviously something that she's heard quite a bit from my wife and I, as we have tried to allow her to some time and space sometimes to think about some of the decisions that she's making and how those could go better in the future. Sometimes we ask her to go to her room and think about it. And that was brought to my mind because as I thought about how God treats this question from the people, I feel like he is allowing Israel to go to their room and think about it. They're going to say, "God, have we gone too far? Have we forced you to turn away from us completely and turn your face away?" And God says, "Well, it's a good question. And I don't mind if you take some time to consider the ramifications of that question and what this world would be like and your lives would be like if it were true." But next comes the turn. And in the reading I gave you, the turn begins to happen within the chapter of Zephaniah. Within Zephaniah 3, we see a turn from despair and hopelessness and suffering and pain to a message from God of hope. Within the people's suffering, and even despite God's righteous anger and jealousy for the sake of his people, we see that the ultimate answer is going to be one of hope. And I have 7 points here, 7 things that I think from the rest of the reading, and this is the end of Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, all of these prophets. Certainly, all of them contain some aspect of what we've talked about, like the people crying out, the sense of, wow, we've gone pretty far here, and maybe have lost our last chance. But within each of these books contains the hope of God that is going to be manifest ultimately in the Messiah. But we'll get there. I'm probably jumping a little bit ahead. Let's start with some of the key first points, and we'll start with Zephaniah. That's the first book that contains some of this hopefulness that I gave you guys to read. The first thing that God tells the people is that you should actually be joyful. Now, this is a crazy statement, right? We think about just how terrible the state of the world is during the time of exile, pulled away from their homes, probably family members killed in front of their eyes, taken and treated as second-class citizens, even servants or slaves by these other nations, ripped away from their homeland that was promised to them by God from long, long ago, losing all hope. And God says, you know what time this is? It's a time to be joyful. How could he say something like this? How could he even dare demand joyfulness in a time of such suffering? Because God says, the true King of Israel, who is me. Not me, Adam. I'm speaking as God here. God is the true King of Israel. And God is coming to end their suffering and gather his people back to himself. If you want to go back and refresh your memory, this is Zephaniah 3, verses 14 through 20. It's a beautiful, wonderful picture, beautiful, wonderful passage of Scripture. Second thing that God's going to say is things are going to be restored to how they've always meant to be. The way that I intended the world to be like is the way that things will be restored to. And that is another reason for joyfulness. Jeremiah 30, verse 22 was my key scripture here. This has been a refrain. This has been the main idea, the main point of God having established a covenant, an agreement with his people from the very start. If we had to boil it down, and we've asked this question several times, we've always said the key statement seems to be, I will be your God and you will be my people. I don't know if you noticed this, but just in the reading that I gave you during this time period, this prophetic literature, I bet that statement showed up 5 or 6 times. You came across that statement so many times, and I gave you 1/100th of the total amount of chapters of prophetic literature that are out there. So the number of times that God reiterates, this is the intent, I will be your God, you will be my people, is vast. It's a vastly used main point, main idea statement by God. And this is what God is working to restore. There's a lot packed into this statement, right? Because it has everything to do with God's own faithfulness to his covenant and to his people and the love that he has for them. It's so relational, isn't it? You will be my people. I will be your God. I will be king. I will be righteous king, true king, who leads you in right ways and not to your own destruction, the way that human kings do. My people will follow me. They will bow down to me as king because they know that I am the one who truly loves them and takes care of them. There's so much wrapped up in this statement, I will be your God, you will be my people. We could take a whole group of sermons probably and class periods to flesh that out. But we see that God is trying to restore something very, very dear, very, very relational, very, very loving and important and crucial. Okay, we move on then to Jeremiah 31, where God now says, I will make a new covenant with you, Israel. And I highlighted 3 things that I saw promises in the new covenant that have never been promised before. Promise number 1. The people will no longer have to seek out God, for he will be within them. God and his commandments and his law and his guidance will no longer have to be searched for. Where is God? Where is God? No one will ever have to ask that again, because ultimately God will be living inside of them. This promise states, this is a very incredible promise, especially to a people group that considered God so separate, so other, that they could not even speak his name out loud. They wouldn't even spell it completely. They wouldn't even use the vowels to spell out the word Yahweh. So God is saying, me, this completely other, holy, separate being from you, am going to come and live inside of you. It's a big deal, really big deal. As a result, all of their sins will be forgiven. All of their sins will be forgiven, he says. Big deal, really big deal. And the third thing is the city, the nation of God, will be reestablished forever. And there's so much that goes into this idea of the city, the nation of God. Home, security, worship, all of these things will be completely restored to how they've always been meant to be. Okay, a fourth thing. The people will be ruled and protected by, Ezekiel 37 tells us, something kind of crazy if we think about it. It's not as crazy to us because I think we're far enough on the other side of being able to see how this whole plan of God is going to play out, that we see what is being meant here. But I don't know, people at the time might have wondered what's really going on, because Ezekiel 37 tells us that the people will be ruled and protected by David. David is coming to take the throne. Now we know that's obviously impossible, right? David's been dead for hundreds and hundreds of years at this point. So what is he talking about? David's coming to rule over Israel again? We know that Jesus in the New Testament is referred to many times as the Son of David. We'll go all the way back to the covenant that God established with David, and God tells David, I will establish your kingdom forever. The kingdom of David will last forever. It will never be destroyed or ended in any way. And so we see that this is a reference to that. And that is ultimately fulfilled by Jesus, as we'll find out, especially as we move into the next session when we come back to the Gospels again. Okay. Isaiah 40, amazing chapter, incredible chapter. God is going to continue to speak hope into his people through these chapters in Isaiah. And God is going to say, I will pardon my people, and I, God, am coming to comfort and rescue you, my people who are in pain and suffering. There will be one who comes before me, God says. One will prepare the way for my rescue. Now we'll begin to make these connections because Isaiah 40 is a key quoted verse in the New Testament, and we know that reference, that one will come to prepare the way in the wilderness for the coming of the Lord who will then come to rescue his people, is John the Baptist. And the gospel authors tell us that is John the Baptist who has come to prepare the way for God himself, who is Christ, Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us. And as a result then, in Isaiah 40, God tells us he will pour out his strength into his people. Isaiah 52 and 53, another incredible couple of grouping of chapters and passages here. God says that the one who is coming, that he was referring to back in Isaiah 40, will be rejected and despised by people. This should have set off some red flags, some alarms for the people. They should have said, wait, that's you. You're telling us you're coming back to rescue us? And we're going to reject you and despise you? God, surely not. It can't be me, right? But it is right. This is exactly what happens to Jesus. The religious leadership, the ones who have vowed to help people follow God, are the very ones who lead a revolt against Jesus and rebel and reject him utterly in every way. But the good news about this, for us, for sure, is that his suffering will bring peace and healing for them. This is explicitly laid out in Isaiah 52. The suffering of the one who is to come will be the thing that actually brings hope and peace and healing for the very people who are causing that suffering. This is mind-blowing. This is huge, everyone. Sometimes we take this kind of stuff for granted, I feel like. But think about what's being promised here. And think about how this is fulfilled in Christ. This is incredible stuff. And then finally in Isaiah 53, it tells us that he will bear the people's sin so that they might be seen as righteous. their very righteousness will be the bearing of their sins that are taken on by Christ, the Messiah. I have one more point. Something else that I actually found at the beginning. This is actually found in Lamentations, the beginning of the reading that I assigned for you. But I wanted to hold it for the end because I think it's a little bit surprising. Maybe less for us if we really think through it, but certainly for the people that heard this prophecy, I feel like it would have been incredibly surprising. Because the people are crying out and they're saying, God, we are your people and we are in suffering and pain and despair here. And we're looking around at these people groups that are taking us over, that are invading us and taking us into exile. And they're doing great. What is the deal here, God? When are they going to get what's coming to them? Is their iniquity going to just last forever and only we will be punished for ours? And in some ways, God is going to continue to kind of tell the people, look, that's between me and them. I will give you a little hint, though, and the hint is their time will come. God will judge not just his own people, although that seems to happen first, but also the people who do not follow God, who are abusing and mistreating his people. They will also be judged. God will judge the nations, it tells us in Lamentations. But here's the surprising part. So that, it says, it will bring conversion. The point of God's judgment of the nations ultimately is going to be to bring those people, at least to give them a chance to turn to him. And I think that's a really, really key theological point that we shouldn't skip over. We should keep focusing on and remembering through all of this Old Testament that we've read so far, is that God's purpose and the whole plan, the entire idea of the plan that God has laid out for the rescue and redemption of both his people and the rest of the world is to bring them closer to him. It's to change their hearts and turn them back to the place that they will ultimately thrive and find true joy and true happiness. And that is right next to him. And what a beautiful statement. What a beautiful prayer as well for us to pray that would continue to happen and that God would continue to use us as his people in that way. All right, that's it for today. We'll hopefully see you next week. Our part 6 of 6, we'll wrap it up. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you guys soon. Bye for now.